tell us about you and tell us about your book.
Sure, yeah. So I'm David Foster. I'm author of the Generative Deep Learning O'Reilly book. The first edition came out in 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago now, considering everything that's happened in between. But the second edition got released in May, and so it's out in everything now, ebook, print. You can buy it on Amazon. I'm also co-founder of a company here in London called Applied Data Science Partners. We're an AI consultancy delivering AI solutions for our clients, a large proportion of which are generative actually these days. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
That's pretty cool. But you wrote this book, the first edition, way back in the day, like kind of in the dark ages of generative.
Yeah.
I guess back then it was deep learning, right? Now it's AI because everything's AI. But
Yeah.
what gave you the inspiration for that? Because that was about the time GPT-2 came out, I think, right?
Yeah, a funny story about that. So yeah, I mean, it was published in 2019. So I started writing it summer 2018, and O'Reilly got in touch a few months before that. So maybe like March, we're talking February 2018, which is actually GPT territory. So even
Yeah,
before GPT-2. And it's funny because
crazy.
the story behind it was that I got really interested in the stuff that DeepMind was doing at the time around AlphaGo and all of
Oh
that
yeah.
stuff, because that was what AI meant back in the day. No one was talking about generative models. It was all about deep reinforcement learning. And so I've written a few blogs on the subject that did really well, and O'Reilly picked up on them and said, look, you could turn this content into a book if you want. Would be happy to kind of host that kind of stuff, and I think it's going to be interesting for a book topic. But I was thinking at the time, like, I didn't really want to write about reinforcement learning because I thought that it's having its day right now, and it was going to take me a year to write the book, and then also like more time to get that out and published. I kind of wanted to write about something that was nascent at the time, and the field that seemed to me to be just on the verge of doing something huge was generative deep learning, which is why I called the book that. And I'm glad I backed that horse because that was exactly what happened. And it's a lot of luck in that choosing that, I think. But it was definitely something I put some thought into at the time.
Yeah, that was a good bet. So,
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like the time when GANs were still all the rage.
yeah.
It was the kind of like GAN a week time, and a lot of it was like cool, but it wasn't useful. It was still the point where people were like, oh, that's cool. You can create a blurry face and you can do something with it. And it was the nice thing to write a book about because the examples you can produce in the book were pretty much in line with state of the art. But now, of course, it has to be a different book because, I can't tell someone how to build their own chat GPT using millions of pounds. So we go through kind of fundamental concepts in the book, and it's more of a book for beginners who want to understand how this technology works at a fundamental level, so that they can, of course, train their own models, but also they have an appreciation of how these big models are actually working under the hood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, O'Reilly was nice enough to send me a copy of your book too, and I read the first few chapters and I thought it was really good. It definitely laid out. I think it demystified, maybe more than anything. I think a lot of the magic behind generative deep learning or AI. What do you think? Do you prefer calling it deep learning or AI?
I wish I'd have called the book Generative AI because that
It
is
would
the
have
term
killed.
now.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is deep learning, so it's true to still say it's generative deep learning. But to be honest with you, I used to have a bit of an ick about the term AI because I felt a lot
Same.
of the models that were being called AI weren't really, they were just glorified rule sets effectively, and that's fine. But like we got to be pretty. We don't want to water the term down because AI needs to be something cool and amazing, and it wasn't, back in the day, I think. But now it really is, and so I'm happier using the term again because for me, what we're doing now is really artificial intelligence.
Right. I mean, I guess could O'Reilly have just changed the title of the book to generative AI instead of deep learning?
Possibly, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. It comes down to kind of like branding of it, and generative deep learning. The first edition did well, so I didn't want to kind of mess it up and kind of then people were confused about whether it was a different book. It very much is a different book in terms of the content. I think I've rewritten
Sure.
the entire thing. I mean, stuff that was relevant back 3-4 years ago is just irrelevant now. So there's a lot of new content, pretty much 80-90%, I would say.
Yeah, what I think, what's that old book? Ian Goodfellow's a deep learning book. I think I have that laying around. I was thumbing through it
Yeah,
recently, and it's like it's interesting just how much things have changed. I mean, it still forms a basis for a lot of stuff, and it's still good techniques. But I mean, just things have moved so fast. I think that came out in 2017 or something too.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's like your book as well. Like it's about writing something that's going to stand the test of time, and foundations should be that, exactly that. It shouldn't be you just chase the latest model or chase the latest technique.
right.
trying to write a book that's going to be just as true in 4 or 5 years time, because we're still talking about fundamental concepts to the field. And that's what I wanted to do. And I think, the book will certainly be something that someone could pick up in a few years time and still be like, yeah, this is still how people talk about generative AI and generative deep learning, even if it's obviously not going to contain the latest models that are out, that haven't even been invented yet.
Walk me through that though, right? I mean, I think it was hard enough writing a fundamental book on data engineering and deep learning and machine learning. I mean, that changes, let's say, orders of magnitude more quickly. I mean, so walk me through your process of identifying, like, what are the foundational things? What are the fundamental things? And what was your thought process in identifying those?
Yeah, one of the first things I did actually was try to break down in my own head the different fields of generative AI that there are, because I thought if I could get a kind of taxonomy of models that were out there, then that stood me in pretty good stead for saying, like, I'm going to take you to the leaves of this tree as it stands today, but this tree is going to grow and grow and grow.
Right.
So, one day, all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about now is going to look like stuff that was talked about in 2023. And that's because of the nature of it being a book. But fundamentally, I can still tell you how it got from the trunk of that tree to the point that we are today. And you just need to extrapolate out to understand what the current models are doing. So like if you're reading a paper in 2025 and you've read my book in 2023, the fundamental ideas that they're talking about in those papers, things like density functions or loss functions, or the ability to have a discriminator and a generator, maybe if you're talking about GAN-based architectures, those ideas are still going to be present, but maybe they've developed a new architecture to do these kind of things. So yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that we cover in the book is like what this taxonomy looks like. So you've got like autoregressive models, stuff where you're just trying to predict the next token, like ChatGPT. You've got stuff like diffusion models, where it's all about denoising and a noising process, and you're looking to undo that noising process that you've manually implemented. These are ideas that are like fundamental to generative deep learning and generative AI. And so whilst there may be in future better ways of achieving these things, like you've got diffusion models now, which were only invented in 2020. So they weren't even pretty much in existence by the time I was writing that first book. It's still the case that that idea is going to run and run and run into the future. So yeah, you've got the kind of fundamental pillars, if you like transformers. With your autoregressive models, you've got your diffusion models, things like variation autoencoders, where it's all about mapping to and from a latent space. Again, fundamental ideas. GANs, that's not going to go away. There's still really impressive GANs being produced, like Drag GAN the other day that came out. Yeah, so it's all about like laying down the foundations and not being scared to say, like, you're going to need to know this stuff if you want to get good at generative AI.
That's really interesting. Like, walk me through your research process, because I mean, again, things change so fast, and it would be easy to, I think, get caught up in the minutia, but miss the bigger picture. And you're probably one of the only people I've seen who's, I think, stepped back and has gotten the wider perspective of this particular field, right? I mean, what was your research process like?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And when I look back, I think like that's one of the fundamental things I had to solve quite early on, is how not to get swamped by the quantity of stuff that's coming out, and try to look through the weeds to get to the actual kind of the so what that people need to know about. So I would say the good thing I think about the fact that I was writing this from the perspective of someone who didn't necessarily have a background in generative deep learning when I was writing, is that I kind of like was reading these papers with the same eyes as somebody who would be reading the book eventually. In that I'm kind of like, everyone's a beginner at this stuff, or most people are a beginner, because there's not many people out there that have got 20 years of experience doing stuff with generative AI. There's probably 20 years of experience doing machine learning, sure,
right?
Like specifically generative AI is quite difficult to gather that amount of depth of knowledge. So I mean, I was looking at this stuff with eyes of somebody who also wanted to know, was just constantly asking like, why this, why that? And when you go down the rabbit hole enough, you get to the truth that you want to write about, and then you make a note of that, and then you move on to the next rabbit hole. And it was like that again and again. I just felt like stuff started to click into place, and you start to make connections between different fields. What's the connection between something like a variation autoencoder and some of the ideas that come up within GANs? Like, is there any connection, or are they completely fundamentally different models? And as soon as you can start to place yourself on that sort of like that plane where you're feeling like you're looking down on the subject rather than you're in it trying to work out the right way to go, that's when you feel like, okay, I can write about this now, because I'm seeing it from a bird's eye perspective. And it'll be the same with your book as well. Like, you're seeing the entire landscape And so you can point people to the right direction and where they actually need to look, and not get stuck in, just this one blog post that you've been reading for the last week. It's really hard to kind of describe that process, but that's what I love about learning and about writing, is that you go on that journey yourself, from someone who's like on the ground in the absolute trenches trying to understand what this stuff is all about.
Yeah.
Someone that you feel like, okay, now I've got some perspective.
Was it scary?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'd say that's the art of, I think that's what makes an author good to read or not good to read, is someone who you feel like. I read a great book recently, for example, about Bayesian learning, and I'm going to find the title actually, because it's worth a shout out.
Yeah.
I don't want to get this right, because it's a really great book. It's all about Bayesian statistics, and let me just find it. 1 second. But basically, the reason I love the book is because of exactly that fact. You feel like the author from the page 1 is literally like, I know this field inside out, and I can show you what you need to know and what you don't need to know. It's called A Student's Guide to Bayesian Statistics by Ben Lambert. And if you're interested in that field at all, then that's the book you need to get. It's absolutely awesome.
Get this on Amazon right now, then.
Yeah, definitely. It's just one of those books that, like, you feel like you're reading a map, not a book, where you just feel like everything's so well signposted, and he never explains a concept too early, and leaves you hanging. That you go into that mental state sometimes when reading books where you're like, I don't know what this subject is at the moment. I know that's explained
all the time.
And it's like, I want to see a progression from simple to complicated. Walk me through that, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things with writing tech books that is a bit challenging, right? Because I mean, you and I wrote books that I would say take more of a timeless approach, but the frustration I have, I don't know if it's frustration necessarily, it just is what it is. But the approach I think a lot of authors take is kind of throw you off the deep end immediately, right? And bombard you with like code examples and stuff, which I think is fine, but you really have to sit down and give people the perspective of why you're doing this, why because I mean, it's because I think for the authors, especially, right? Especially somebody who knows the field inside out, like the author you discussed, Lambert. But it's like, it would be the easy approach would be to say, well, I know everything and you should too. And I assume you do. So here you go. It's almost like, I think authors want to show off how smart they are, versus really serving the interests of the reader. And I try to take the approach of just like dumbing everything down almost ridiculously for that reason, just because, I mean, I ain't that bright. So
exactly. And precisely that. I mean, you've always got to bear the reader in mind, and you also got to think to yourself, how much detail do I actually want to go down into? That's the other challenge, I think, that you're constantly asking yourself is this enough that I can say, like, this book isn't about this, it's about the next level up of this. So like, do I go down to the level of explaining what a test set and a training set is in a book about generative deep learning? Probably to some extent, but I'm not going to like go through the absolute fundamentals of like splitting a data set into two, because that's, at that point, it just becomes about Python, or about pandas or whatever you're using. I think the other challenge, and I'm sure anyone who's written a technical textbook will face this, is how far into the weeds do you go, and how far do you keep it at a high level? And I'm always in favor of erring on the side of high level, but where detail is necessary, not being afraid to go into that detail where it's absolutely required. Yeah,
it's such a balancing act, right? And but I think it's one of these things where I feel like it only comes through mastery of your field and really understanding the material to the point where you know what's going to land and what's not. I think our cheat code for writing the book was doing lots of podcasts. And so by talking to a lot of experts in the field, I think that's one way where we, talking to, and also I think teaching and talking to a lot of beginners too, and running meetups, you just kind of get if you know your audience and you know the material, I think a lot of things take care of itself from there.
That's a really good tip, actually. Just to show people early what you're doing, and don't sort of hide it in a folder on your computer. And I mean,
it's a huge mistake. I don't know what I think we can talk about this too, but I think the nature of writing a book, I think, is changing a lot these days. Where in the past it was very waterfallish, like write the book, get it out, and then see if it lands.
Yeah.
I think these days you just have so many more opportunities to, to get feedback on your ideas. And I think the most important thing too is building the audience around your ideas. You're fortunate in the sense where the idea sort of just landed or exploded, really. You just need to write a good book in the field, and then I think the rest takes care of itself. But when you're trying to do stuff like what you're doing or what I'm working on, it's like it's a pretty hard things to do. And I think just building, again, getting the people's ideas early and often, and seeing kind of where things are landing with or not, that's hugely important. And I feel like the next book I'm working on, for example, I think I'm going to release a lot of the chapters on Substack.
Yeah, exactly.
Split it up that way. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people do that as well, where it's almost like the book is released completely publicly, but ultimately, if you want the physical copy, you're going to pay for that.
Yeah.
But people do want physical copies, because I know I would. I mean, I love reading physical books. I think it's an infinitely better experience, and I'm not a massive fan of kind of reading ebooks, but I know a lot of people it works for them. But I think it's a big questions being asked at the moment about what the role of nonfiction is. What's the role of a book as opposed to a blog, as opposed to a Substack, or as opposed to just a well-documented code base? For me, the role is that, if I pick up a book about something, I want to know that if I read that book cover to cover, that I've got a fundamental understanding of that subject now, and I wouldn't need to, as I'm reading that book, go and research 101 things that the author hasn't explained very well on blogs, because that's not the point. I want that book to be self-contained. And I do like books that you read cover to cover and not just reference books. I think that progression through the subjects is important. That's the role of the book, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. And I think anymore too, especially with the rise of generative AI, there's the ability, I would say the ability to write a book is just, it's gotten a lot easier, but I think the ability to write a really good book has gotten, I would say, easy in some ways and hard in other ways. I think you're going to have less competition to stand out, because everyone's going to be using ChatGPT or something to write books and blog posts. And you've seen the outputs of these things. They're okay. They're passable. And I've seen some people too, like, I'm not going to name names, but I think I saw somebody launch a book recently, and I looked at some of the samples of it, and I was like, this isn't that person's voice. I'm pretty sure they use ChatGPT to write this. And I highly doubt it'll succeed in the marketplace, just because it's not just writing prose, right? In words, it's about having a story arc. It's about having, sort of a progression of ideas, right? And that's something that I think is just, at least for now, give it 2 weeks, but it's just really hard for generative AI to do that.
Do you think you'd have written your book quicker if ChatGPT had been in existence? Because I often get that question. People say, "Oh, it took a year to write." Like, "I bet you wish ChatGPT was out there, because you could have got it out in a month." And I kind of think to myself, actually, I wouldn't, because I would have used it for sure to kind of come up with some skeleton prose that I can start to adapt. I mean, like everyone is these days. I mean, I don't think anyone who's got access to these tools is starting with a blank page anymore, and that's great. But you're right that I don't ever want that book to feel like someone else's voice. A sort of a shade of grey of like every other book author out there. I want it to sound like my book. So I'd never just be cut and pasting code from it, but it would always just be, if anything, I would use it as a template to kind of come up with structure or ideas.
Oh, for sure. I think that's how I use it for the book I'm working on right now. It's like, I think there's certain areas where I think it excels, right? And I think skeleton template stuff is good. Like, it's really good at picking out blind spots that you probably didn't even think of. And I think that's pretty cool. And if you needed to describe something like describe a relational database, for example, right? That's been done a bajillion times. It probably has a better idea of how that should look than you. And I think that's perfectly appropriate. Tweak it to fit your voice. But to me, that's no different than reading on Wikipedia and then kind of transcribing it, right? Because that's literally what ChatGPT just did too. But in terms of, in some ways it's good. I think in other ways it almost creates more work for you, right? Because you're going to have to go back through and like change it, and half the time it's completely wrong anyway. So you got to fix that. And so it's definitely, you just got to use the tool, I think, and just understand where it's going to fit into your workful, right? But
that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly how I see it as well. And I think the more and more I see of content out there, the more I feel like I'm developing a bit of a spidey sense of when it's been written by AI and when it hasn't. Like you just get the feel sometimes, and you're like, this is weird. This doesn't feel like how a human writes. So yeah, I think, you know, especially kids, they'll start developing that skill. That'll just be something that, you know, as we get older, we'll probably be looking back going, how are these kids knowing, like, when something is AI generated, it will probably just look all all nice and the same to us. But yeah, I think it will just be something that the younger generations have out of the box almost, because they'll be fine-tuned to see it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like my oldest kid, he's almost 13, and he's a professional level artist at this point. But and I showed him stuff like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, and he's like, "That's cool, but it's kind of lame." Like, and he just goes back and starts drawing by hand. It's just because he that's what he likes to do. He's like, it didn't click, you know. But I'm sure he'll be using it. And all the kids, I talked to a 6th grade class back in early this summer before they're getting out. And we talked about AI, you know, and I think they had a lot of questions about it. Like I said, it's going to take over the world. And I was like, I have ChatGPT on my phone. Like, I'm going to pass my phone around. Don't drop it. But just, you know, let's ask some questions. Let's see where the boundaries of this thing is. And I think by the end, they were, I think, very fully aware, kind of like where the boundaries were, you know. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, people are going to use it. I think the thing that I'm concerned about is really how much are you going to outsource your critical thinking?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is what I mean, my daughter as well. I mean, I worry, I mean, she's only 1 year old, but I worry when she goes to school that there's basically going to be this tendency for, you know, kids to just get lazy and feel like they've just got the personal assistant to do everything. And that's the last thing you want kids to be thinking when they're going through school. It should be a time for them to explore like ideas, and university as well, and just to kind of get stuff wrong, make mistakes. You know, and that's when you build your character, and that's when you build who you are and what your voice is. So we've got to be extraordinarily careful how we use these tools in schools. And here in the UK, for example, the Russell Group, which is the set of the top universities in the UK, have put out a statement on how generative AI is going to be rolled out at their universities. But at the moment, it's a very much sort of statement of intent rather than anything practical. So you couldn't, for example, pull anything from that document that says how they're going to deal with a student who submits a fully ChatGPT'd essay. And I think as we go forward, especially into the next academic year, these questions are just going to become more and more prevalent. Like, what do you do if someone just submits a pretty good essay, but it's all generated through ChatGPT? Can you detect it? Do you penalize it? Like, how do you even stop this?
Isn't OpenAI just get rid of the AI detection?
Yeah,
it's like
because it's useless. I mean, as soon as you came out, it was a token effort to kind of make something like this work, and I think they knew that it's impossible. I really doubt that something like this is ever going to be possible in sort of a way that is truly able to be rolled out at something like a university. And I know there are tools out there that claim to do this, but as many articles as I see of their marketing saying that it's possible, I see the opposite in actual, like, people using it and blog posts saying this stuff doesn't work. So
yeah,
hard to know where it's going to land.
Interesting. I think that the nature of an essay is probably going to change too. It's just, I think more than anything, it flips the funnel on how we probably taught in the past, right? So writing an essay was the thing you did. Now you have things that write essays. And I heard an interesting comment. I can't remember who it was, but they're talking about how, you know, maybe it's more like you're going to be given maybe a D graded essay, you know, A through F or whatever. So not a great essay. And your job is to figure out why it sucks and make it better.
Yeah.
Right. I think, and that's more of an exercise where I think that's, because you're absolutely right now that you can just, like, you know, hit save and submit on ChatGPT and it just generates content. Like,
yeah.
You know,
the way I think about it, I think you're right. Like the way I think about it is this: we've always used an essay as a proxy for intelligence. We've never really been trying to grade the essay. We're trying to grade the student,
right?
But we've used the essay as a proxy for their intelligence. You could pretty much have a one-to-one mapping between how good that essay is and how good that student is, and that link has always been pretty much true. Like, sure, there's stuff like plagiarism, so you've got to be careful they're not copying stuff from other people's ideas. But ultimately, like, if there is a good essay, you're giving the student a good grade, and that means that they are going to be more attractive to employers in the future, and that's always been true. But that link has now been broken. So the question we've got to ask is, like, bigger than just like, how do we change essays, or how do we, like, stop people using ChatGPT for essays? The question is, are essays even any good anymore as a method as a proxy? Do we need to start bringing in-person like debates, in-person vivas, stuff where, like, people get the chance to express themselves outside of the written word? How can we use stuff that isn't natural language as a means for testing people? So yeah, speeches or debates or kind of forums, where people have to form groups and teams that collect around a certain group of ideas, and maybe they have to come up with some way of presenting those ideas across to the opposition team. And this is a more dynamic format of education that I think we need to move towards. But that's hard. Like that takes a lot of effort and a lot of thought from governments and institutions to work out how that looks in a classroom setting, and in an example. If we need to move back more towards tested exams in examples and not kind of coursework based, where they're taking it away and have more time. Big questions basically, but we can solve these questions. They're not like completely insurmountable objects. We just need to work out what it means to have an education in 2023 and 2024. And the answer isn't like you submit your essay and you get a grade. That's what they were doing 100 years ago. And so we need to, I think.
Yeah, I think there's going to be more of a, I just think that the pure bombardment of AI generated content means it's going to be really difficult to know what's real and what's not real. I have this this theory that we're going to actually revert back to in person.
Yeah.
Like that's just going to be like a really cool thing, because it's the only way you can tell if you're dealing with a human or not. Even podcasts, like my friend Ken G, he says he likes podcasting now, leaning into that because it's like the one thing that AI can't replace, and it might. But then you have deep fakes, and our conversation in a few years just could be the Joe and David bots talking to each other, and that's kind of how it is. And so
you could probably build that today, even like that. That could be built right here, right now. Like I could put a load of stuff that I've said in the past into a database. You could do the same, or we could just sort of like knock around ideas in our own language models, like for sure. Whether it would be interesting for people to listen to is another thing. I'd probably just talk about like football all the time, and it wouldn't be interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, and that's where in person, I think again, it might be the thing. Who knows?
I'd love that though, because I love that that feeling that you've done something like that. It's more than just kind of there's a certain sort of sterile nature, isn't there, to, I don't know, conferences that are online, or wasn't it during the last few years where everything just moved online and you're just at your screen even more. And I just loved it when the conferences started coming back and you can meet people in person. And,
it's huge. I was just at a Snowflake and Databricks last month, and it was cool seeing everybody. Right, it's kind of the who's who of the data world. They're all just hanging out together, right? And that was super fun.
Yeah.
Catching up with people that are just basically squares on a screen that you see all the time you're talking to them. So
right. And no one remembers anything from the presentations, because it's all just you realize that your experience is just so much more than what you see in your eyes. And it was about, I don't know, that the room was like really claustrophobic, or the room was like this amazing auditorium that you're in, or these are the things that form memories, aren't they? And what the guy was wearing, or what the person was wearing at the time. And like it's all of that sort of stuff that you just miss out on if you're just doing everything online, staring at little screens, like you say, little squares.
Oh yeah. I think one thing I took off too, my friend Ethan Aaron, he runs he started the low-key happy hour in New York City, and now it's like this global phenomenon. Have you been to the low-key happy hour in London?
I haven't actually. No, that sounds good.
Oh, you should go. Yeah. Chris Tabb, if you know him. He's putting it together, but it's fantastic. I went to one last October.
Cool. I'll make a note of that.
Yeah, you should go. So I think it's at Q Bar, wherever the hell that is in downtown London, Financial District, awesome. I think. So yeah, I think I'll be there actually. And I'm going to be there in September. We'll have to catch up and get a pint. So I'll be at it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you're over in London, then swing by. Our offices are in Shoreditch, which is like it's where all of the cool people go. But we in our company, we kind of bring down the coolness by a factor of 10, I think. But
hey, you're a best-selling author now, so you're cool. So.
I'll try my best.
Walk me through that. I mean, being a best-selling author, I've been there. You're there. What's that like? Seeing your book do really well?
I would say this is. I mean, through the writing process, like you always think to yourself, like, not really important, like how well it does, and I'm cool with it just being out there. And as long as it's the book I wanted to write, then I'm happy. And then as soon as it gets published, of course, you just spend your whole time on Amazon refreshing the bestsellers page to see where it's doing. And I think like I wouldn't say necessarily there's an absolute correlation between like how well it sells and how good the book is. And there's a ton of stuff on Amazon that, I would say just does well through very, very good marketing, and that's fine. So I don't like to compare myself too much to like, whether I'm fourth or fifth or ninth or 10th, as long as I feel like people are genuinely getting something out of the book. And that's where I get my enjoyment of it from. Speaking to people who've come up to me and said like, yeah, this has really helped. I didn't know anything about it before, and now I'm, help me get a job or something. I've had that a few times.
That's so rewarding when that happens.
Much more to me than anything. I think the Amazon review process is just shocking as well. I don't know about you, but like fighting for kind of like the early reviews, because you get everyone basically piling in, don't you, at the start, who like buys it and like it. I don't know. It's like their copy that arrived 2 days later than it said or something, and you get like a 1-star review, and you're like, oh, that's got nothing to do with the book. That's just your copy arrived a bit late.
Yeah, it sucks when you see that. I've had that happen too. Like somebody wrote a 1-star review, the book's damaged. Somebody wrote a 2-star review saying that the fundamentals of data engineering is about data infrastructure, not about data science. And they wrote this giant almost essay about it. And I don't know. I had to put it on LinkedIn because I'm like, yeah, this is it's just a funny review.
The annoying thing about it is that the people who do this kind of stuff do it quickly. They buy the book and have an immediate reaction to it. And the people who are actually reading it page for page and absorbing it, they'll write their review, but they're going to do it in like 2 months' time when they finish the book. And the problem with the Amazon review process is, of course, like you've got to make sure those first few reviews are up there, because otherwise your book is a 2-star book for like the first 5 reviews or whatever that come in, because you've just got like a few handful of ones and maybe some. So I wish they'd implement some sort of process where like there's a prior, where it assumes that you've written maybe like a 3.5 or 4-star book. Like most stuff on Amazon is average, which is fine. They should give you that as a prior. Like your book is a prior understanding that it's going to be about average. And as the reviews come in, maybe they start replacing that prior. But like just to off the bat immediately say, well, if you've got 1 review and it's 1 star, then you've got a 1-star book. It's just nuts, because then people don't buy it, and it affects those immediate sales. You've got to get the engine going before you can kind of, truly trust that those reviews coming in are genuine. And you get bot reviews and all sorts of rubbish. So
lots of rubbish. It was a Bill Inman, if you know who he is. He's written like 67 books or something like that. His advice to me when I met him a while ago, when the book was still being formulated, he's like, there's certain people that are just going to hate you, no matter what. Maybe 5%, 10% of people out there are just going to hate everything you're about, the book you wrote, your kid probably, and that's just how it is. And so I think the sooner you can like absorb that and just realize that that's just part of the process, the better, because it's and that's why for us we got like I think very savage tech reviewers for our book, people that would just beat the crap out of us, like without fail, because it's like, once it's out, the internet is a far more brutal place. And so,
I mean, the comment section on YouTube is the most brutal, I think. I mean, I've done a few podcasts now, and like I've been really lucky to have so many great people say really nice things, afterwards. But you often get some really negative stuff as well, like completely unprovoked or completely unaccounted for. You'll know it as well. I mean, in hosting a podcast, I guess it's the same thing, right? Where people sort of go sometimes like, this is not really talking about anything interesting, or like they don't know what they're talking about. It's just like, I don't know who these people are that have the time to do this. But I try not to read anything like this, because it just gets to you after a while.
I stopped reading my book reviews. For example. I check the ranking.
Exactly.
But book reviews, it's like, because at this point, I mean, actually today's the 1-year anniversary of our book getting published. Our editor texted me this morning, me and Matt.
Many congrats. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. But it's one of these things where I think, for you, maybe, your book is the second edition of it, so I don't need to tell you this, but it's like for the audience out there too. I mean, what really matters is the longevity of the reviews and the, I think the, whether your book is successful or not. It's not just based upon a few days or weeks, but it's like, a year in, are you still doing well, right? And so I think that's a huge litmus test. Like Martin Kleppman is a really good example. Designing data intensive applications, like that book is like put out in 2017, and it still kills. Like it's still, I think, O'Reilly's best selling book. And I can only aspire to be like that. But
and I think this is where the books that are really foundational are the ones that tend to do the best, because they just it's what people need. They don't need necessarily a book about something really niche, the reason they go to books is for foundational understanding. If they need something extraordinarily niche, they'll go to the internet and find a blog post about it.
Right.
It's not to say niche books can't do really well, and I'm sure there's a ton of really good niche books out there, but it's just much, much harder. You've immediately limited your audience down to a handful of people who want to know about that one precise thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, keeping books broad is definitely the way to go, I think.
Yeah, it's a balancing act too, right? Because it's like, how broad is too broad? Like, you're trying to build everybody. Like, who's the audience? Yeah, I think O'Reilly does a good job at that when they with your book proposal. It's like, who's the audience? What's this for? It's definitely a business plan. I think for the audience out there too, if you're thinking about writing a book, even if you're going to self-publish, write a book proposal and have other people look at it. This is it's a good way to clarify your thinking around this book. All too often, I see people just jump straight into writing, and it's like, and it kind of sucks actually. Because you're not focused on the outcome, right? You haven't thought about all the different angles of it. Like, what's the market? Who are the competing titles? It's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Like, what makes you different? So.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the same. I mean, my book now is competing with a ton of other really, really good titles in the field on generative AI, and that's fine. Whereas the first edition had pretty much no competition whatsoever. There wasn't a single book out there on Gen AI. So yeah, it has to be a different book now, because you've kind of got to think, well, what are the other books doing? What are they covering that I'm not covering at the moment? And what do I need to include? And, where can I add more value? And yeah, I mean, there's definitely room. There's room out there for kind of foundational books still. And don't think if anyone listening thinking, kind of they've all been written now, then not necessarily. Like, there's going to be tons of stuff going forward. And for example, like generative AI, there's going to be a need for a foundational book out there about the deployment of these solutions, which my book, isn't necessarily about. It's more about the practical theory of how these models work and how to get them running on your own machine, and small examples, and showing you the nuts and bolts of how they work. But like, there's going to be a need for a book out there just on like large language model deployment in the wild. What do you do? How do you go about it? So yeah, like stuff like that. If someone's out there sort of thinking, how do I do this? And I've got great ideas and I know how to write this, then that's the kind of book that might be appealing to the likes of O'Reilly, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious to see how much they dive into generative AI topics. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm tech reviewing a few books.
Oh wow,
for O'Reilly, and I have no qualms about doing that, because I'm not trying to be protective over the field of generative AI. I mean, there's going to be so much out there that needs to be written about, and there's space for all of these books out there. So, yeah, it's really cool that this is happening, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. I tech review quite a few books as well, and I think it's a misnomer that I think a lot of people who aren't in content don't understand. Some people in content don't understand this either. But it's like, content's not a zero-sum game. So you run a consultancy, for example, that is very much a zero-sum game where I get a deal, you get the deal, we're both not getting the deal. So you fight it out. Content's different. It all feeds in itself. So you being on my podcast, for example, it's like, that's gonna, we have a good discussion that helps both of us, right? And it helps not just us, but the audience as well. Like, that's super cool. So yeah,
absolutely. And I love the idea as well that people still buy books. I think it's great that a publisher like O'Reilly still exists, and we're not in this constant like blog world where like everyone just gets all their content from blogs. I think it's great that these things still exist.
Oh yeah, I know when I first started writing fundamentals of data engineering with Matt, some people were asking like, why are you writing a book? Nobody writes books, right? And these people are making courses on data engineering and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know, I just want to write a book, because I think there's nothing that replaces the amount of critical thinking that you have to put yourself through, and just just the sheer amount of just like mental twists and turns that occur. Like, there's no substitute for it. I don't think there ever will be a substitute for it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, exactly. I've written blogs, I've written books, but I don't think there's anything that quite compares to that mental process you have to put yourself through.
It's grueling.
It is really grueling. Yeah, if you're going to take it on, anyone listening, you've got to be pretty confident that you're going to see it through, because it's it takes it out of you.
Oh yeah, and especially like the last 75% of it, like it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, rewarding when it's out, but it wasn't. It's it's the Pareto thing, isn't it? That you put 80% of your effort into that last 20% of content, and because that's the most difficult bit to write, So yeah.
Are you a perfectionist?
Yeah, I think so, and I'm pleased that I am. I wouldn't want to be one of these people who kind of doesn't want to look at the detail ever. But it's just one of those things that I value in other people as well. Actually, I never like it when people say, they're a perfectionist and therefore they don't kind of yeah, they don't see the big picture, because I think you can do both. And it worries me more if people don't see the detail. Well, it's certainly something we look for when we're hiring for our consultancy, for example.
Yeah. It's a weird one. I think for me, like I told people, like I can't co-author again. I'm a bit too of a maniac when it comes to certain things. So it's like, if you want to co-write this next book, and I'm just like, you trust me, you don't want to deal with me. I'm a bit of an ass. It's weird. So you find these things out about yourself. Like I'm pretty chill in a lot of areas, but this is like the one area where it's like, it has to, like everything has to be
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I can be very blunt and harsh with people when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's
yeah.
So
I did think about it for the second edition, because I thought I haven't got the time. We were just in the process of having our child, and I thought I haven't got time to like literally put as much effort into this as I did the first edition. But yeah, the thought of trying to co-author just filled me with even more dread. And I thought actually in the long run it would be more time consuming, because I know other people are out there that can do a better job than me actually on some of these concepts. I'm sure that have a deeper understanding, that are more adept at certain fields. But just thinking like, yeah, stylistically and for the flow of the book, there's nothing quite like sort of seeing that process through from start to finish. And yeah, I'm glad I've made that decision. I think in the long run.
Well, yeah, you got to pick your co-pilot pretty. Yeah. It's a judgment call. I don't know if that's a right or wrong way. I think our book, like it wouldn't have been the same if it were just me or Matt writing it. It had to be both. And I don't I'm very happy about the outcome of that. But yeah, and maybe for you, who knows? Maybe at some point there's a book where you have to have a co-author, and that makes total sense. You never know. But it's like, but you can definitely tell your book is uniquely yours, and that's what makes it great, right? So
I'm just I think you're right. Like, there's no right or wrong answer to this thing, and I know some books that have been brilliantly co-authored actually, and yours is a good example of that. And I think others where I feel like there's different. There's no point at which you feel like that you can hear the voice of one author and it flips to the voice of the other author. But it's when there's a good balance, I think, between the two co-authors.
Yeah, for sure. So what's next for you?
Well, so in terms of writing, definitely no more book writing. I'm happy with the fact that the book's been released 2 months ago, and I'm not launching myself into another book. My primary focus and sole focus, really, sort of from a business perspective, is putting all my effort into Applied Data Science Partners, which is my business, co-founded with somebody 6 years ago, Ross Viteshjak. And we've grown the business organically today, and we intend to continue doing so. Cool. It's very much something we're incredibly proud of. We hire amazing people who I love working with, and we have fascinating projects. So I kind of want to just throw myself into that, really, and make sure we're doing the best job for our clients, but also that we're absolutely at the cutting edge of this stuff, because I never want to feel like we're behind. It's too exciting to miss out on. We're just trying to absolutely keep pace with the field and leverage everything that it's got to offer.
Oh yeah, especially in this field. If you get behind, you get really behind. Like, probably impossibly behind. So, yeah, that's interesting. Have you felt like the books helped your business?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, in terms of, we're in the lucky position. Actually, generative AI, I don't think anyone can claim truly that they saw this coming for like years. And there's a lot of companies who've maybe got a little bit ahead of the curve with some copywriting tools, for example, that were out before the likes of ChatGPT. But essentially every consultancy is now working off of the same starting gun.
Right.
ChatGPT's launch, basically, that's when it hit the public eye, and that's when businesses really started to get on board with this stuff. So the question every company is asking who wants services, consultancy service, is like, how can you differentiate yourself? Why you and not any other consultancy? And I think the way that it's helped is, at least we now have something where we can say, like, we've got this kind of thing, this book that we can literally show you to say we understand this subject. And the whole company is built around the fact that this is something that's been a particular passion of mine and Ross as well, and that we understand this field really, really deeply. So, like, if you're going to back a consultancy to get this work done for you, then we're as good as any, because like we can actually show you this is the document that kind of proves what we're talking about. We're not just kind of putting out marketing material with the same kind of flavor as everyone else. We're trying to actually prove that we can do this stuff technically. So yeah, I think it has helped the business. But the business stands on its own 2 feet, and we've got a ton of really great clients and a great kind of base of previous work that we can draw upon as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, running a consultancy it's a lot of work, and yeah, it's so to get you to your level of success, I think it's really awesome. It's like Matt and I, we had a consultancy, and I think at the end we're just like, I think based upon the book and just directions it was pulling us, we're just like, I don't know, maybe we just sort of mothball this thing for a bit, and that's kind of what we did. I mean, it's still open if you want to work with Matt and me, that's great. But we just decided to focus on other stuff. We're more focusing on like workshops and stuff now, I think, and trying to change it to because with consultancy, it's interesting. You got to be in it to scale it. I think like if you try and say boutique, it's I don't know, maybe it's different in England, but I know here it's hard. Like you either have to like I think have an agenda to really grow a company to a huge team, and or just plan on staying small and stay very niche. But
and it's very heavily influenced by the economics of the day as well. I mean, COVID years, obviously, like every business stopped spending on R&D because they were trying to save money to pay their staff. I mean, that's where you realize actually what you're doing is it's a function of how good you are at it, but it's also a function of the market, and you've got to kind of ride the waves of the good times and make sure that in the downturns that you're also being really lean and efficient and not sort of just being wasteful in your spending or in how you're running the business. So it's really important for us that we've never sort of seen our company as something that we want to grow to the point where like we're feeling we're just growing beyond our means. We've grown completely organically, and that's how we've always wanted to do it. So yeah, the team of people, I couldn't choose a better group basically to be working with. They're really awesome, and yeah, we'll keep doing that and see where it gets us.
That's super cool. Well, awesome. Yeah, fun chat. How can people get a hold of you or find out more about you?
Yeah, a few places. So LinkedIn is probably the best one to find me on. My username, I guess, on there is David T. Foster. As well, my email, david@adsp.ai. So that stands for Applied Data Science Partners. I am on Twitter as well. I'm David ADSP on Twitter, but I'm not I don't use Twitter a lot, to be honest, these days. So I'm best to find me on or X, I guess.
X is it?
Recording. So like you can best reach me on LinkedIn or my email.
Okay, I'll show notes. Well, cool, man. Yeah, congrats on your success. I look forward to seeing your book in the rankings. Again, we obsessively, I think we both obsessively watch them. So
it's so volatile, though, right? Like one day it's top, and then next day it's like you can't even find it on any page. Just disappears and it's back again.
Yeah. I think it's joking that was Nick Singh and I. He wrote a ACES data science interview, so we always jockey for number 1 and number 2 in several categories, and then you come out of nowhere. And we're like, it's like
nice.
Where it is. So.
Well, yeah, it's been great speaking to you, and if ever you're in London, like there's more than one place to go and have a beer. So we'll
I noticed. Yeah.
Great.
yeah. I'll be there. I'll be there in September for Big Data London. I'll be keynoting.
Cool.
So So.
All right. Yeah. Just find me, and we'll go grab a drink.
We'll do, man. Cool. All right. Have a good day.
All the best. Yeah. See you, man.
Okay, bye. See you.